Hi, welcome back to OD YouTube channel, and today we are here for the Diamine Inkvent Calendar Teal Edition, and let's go for day number 5. And it's here. This is the window door that we want today. And we'll have a... which color is this? Cognac or something like that? It's called Mary Rose or Marie Rose. I'm not sure what this really means. I'll call it Mary Rose, like with an English way. And it is a standard ink. I cannot really know. This is kind of golden or caramel thing, cognac color. I'm quite curious about these kind of colors. Sometimes they are just too light and maybe that's it. They are just sometimes too light shade of brown. I like brown inks, so nice to see. I'll be right back with the swatch. Stay there. So let's make the swatch of this ink. Let me just take the cap off, put it away, grab a little pipette, take a few drops, one, not enough, 2, 3, one drop in excess. It's not problematic. Let me just cap the little bottle, put it aside, pick up the Victorinox Alox Hunter knife, which is quite nice, and let's spread the ink. And this ink spreads in a very kind of strange way. It looks like it moves all of it around. Maybe too light for my taste, but that's my personal taste. And this is the kind of color that we need to watch and see how it will dry. I would say it reminds me of some cognac color. That's how I would maybe describe this ink, at least the way it looks right now. It also reminds me of raw sienna watercolor paint, because it's very kind of vivid. So again, it doesn't seem to have lots of shading. We'll need to let it dry and then we can assess it better and compare with other swatches of other inks, because right now this is not a faithful reproduction of how the ink will look like. So I'll be right back for the rest of the video. So let's take a look at this Mary Rose ink. This is the swatch when it's dry, and it is, it's very hard for me to describe this color. I would call it kind of a caramel color. It's very, I don't have many words to try to describe this. So it is a dark ochre or a light brown, but if it is an ochre, it is a brown ochre, not a yellow ochre. So not that easy to describe, but I will show it to you next to other inks, and that may help you. So this ink may be compared with, I have here the Leonardo Officina Italiana Sepia, which is kind of similar, a very light brown, but this one has much more shading. But I would say this is kind of the, if we did the mean of the light and darker parts of this one, I think we would get this. So this is kind of the same, but with much less shading. I also have here Diamine Sepia, and I can say about this the same thing that I said about that one. I have the Kaweco Sunrise Orange, and it's obvious this is not orange. I have the Private Reserve by Buttercup, and this is not also a yellow, not even a deep yellow, but going into the other Inkvent calendars from previous years, in 2019 there was this gingerbread, which is clearly more on the brown side. There was a candlelight from 2021, which is yellow, not this color, but there was this brandy snap, and I think this ink is almost a match, not the same, but very, very similar. I think similar enough to be used as a replacement inside a pen. So I think in a pen you will not notice these kind of variations. And here we have this year's Colorverse Colorvent Calendar 2025 number 2 Apollon, and this one is more of a dark yellow ochre ink and not that color. So this is it. This is more this kind of a brandy color or caramel color. That's I think I would call it caramel. So with this ink that has a little variation, not much, maybe a little bit of sheen there, but it's kind of black. You don't see, it's not a very interesting ink. It doesn't have many special characteristics, and I made a chromatography, as I usually do in these videos. And what we have here is an ink that is completely non-water resistant, so the original line completely disappeared, and then at the end we have some pink, you can see there, some pink and some yellow and green. So this is it. This ink will not resist water. So for the next tests of this ink, I chose two pens, and one is this, and this is the Sailor Profit Junior yellow, or maybe so let me just move the tripod a little bit because it's shaking with the table. Sorry about that. So I have this, it's also called in some places Sailor Compass. I'm not sure how the name is the correct name. So it has a medium fine nib, the MF nib, which is made of steel. It is a cartridge converter pen, transparent and yellow, and I like yellow pens and I like Sailor. This is the low end of Sailor pens. And I have here a Parker 45 Coronet that I always use for the calendars, because it's kind of a spare pen that I have in my collection. It doesn't have the correct ring here on the section, and it is metal, but it has an interesting oblique nib that, some ink on the hand, that allows me to make, there is an O there, if you can see it, that allows me to make some line variations different from what I can get with a finer one like this. So, using these two pens, I got these writing samples. As usual, moleskin paper, Oxford optic paper, and Navigator copy paper. And this is not white paper, both these two are. So what can we see about this ink is that the ink gets a little light on paper. For me, too light to be really comfortable to write with, I would say, and it looks lighter with the Sailor, which was expected, and it has lots of shading with the Parker 45, as you may see there, and that makes it much more interesting in my opinion. And interestingly, the shading is very different from what we can see on the swatch, because it maybe also because the color of the paper, that is kind of ivory color, here you can see there is almost kind of a pink tone to it. With this ink there is no bleed through, so this ink is very well behaved in a not so good paper as the Moleskine paper. Now, here on the Oxford paper, we can also see that the shading within the writing is even more pronounced, and of course, as usual, in this paper, the line difference is even more apparent between the two pens. You can see that the lines have, the words have, or the letters have some shading variation because there are more ink in some parts than the others. If you like that, this is a good ink to do this if you use a very broad ink nib. On the other side, no bleed through. So again, very nice behavior. Of course, this nice behavior was expected because if it worked well with the Moleskine paper, the chances were that it would behave also very well with the Oxford optic paper. Finally, let's go for the Navigator 80 grams per square meter copy paper, and here we see that the ink loses all its brightness because in this paper there is almost no line variation except in the places there, like this Q that was very close, so a lot of ink was put there, but compared with Oxford paper, I would say that the writing here looks very flat. No feathering, so the ink behaves well. It has some bleed through as usual on this paper, but it's not so bad even on this paper. I would not like now to write on the other side with this kind of bleeding, but it's usable. So if you want a safe ink to use, this is kind of safe even with a broader nib. So it's nice in that sense, although it is a bit too light for me. Now let's see how it behaves on the Rhodia dot pad. And here what we see is I wrote this with the Sailor, so the writing time is around 20 seconds. Not bad, but the water resistance is like this. I always do this, the lines, I let it dry, then I drop a few drops of water, I let it sit for a while, then I clean it with a paper and let it dry, and you can see that with this ink there is you can't even guess where the line was. So this ink is not water resistant. For me, it's zero water resistant. So if you want to have an ink that will protect your writings for the future, this is not the one. Now let me just do the final writing test on this paper with both pens. So the quick brown fox jumps over the lazy dog, and let me bring this closer to the camera so you can see it's still wet. It has a nice shading even with this nib. Focus, okay. And I have here the Parker. Let's see if it likes to write in this paper. Sometimes I think this pen doesn't like all the papers, or it's the way I hold this oblique nib, it's not for me. So the quick brown fox jumps over the lazy dog. And this is the writing sample with both pens. So here you can see that the writing already, it's not even dry, but you can already see how this one will have some shading, and I think it is really fun. If you use it with a broader nib, it will look darker and maybe more usable. I think with a very fine nib, as it happens with the MF nib of the Sailor, it may be too light and too difficult to read. So this was the ink number 5 of the Diamine Inkvent Calendar 2025. So I hope to meet you here soon. I mean tomorrow. So see you tomorrow. Bye.